Welcome to a brand new episode, friends. In this episode, we'll be listening to the story of Dylan and the alien queen Alice, a story of how hatred turned into love. Enjoy watching. The alien queen hated humans, but everything changed when she met a human man. The word nobody in the palace of Ashen Hold would say out loud that autumn was plague. The court had an admirable vocabulary for avoiding it. There was the northern situation. There was the seasonal difficulty. There was, from the Minister of Grain, who had built an entire career out of never finishing a sentence anyone could quote back at him, this ongoing matter of general health. 940 dead in the river districts, and the man stood in the map hall calling it a matter of general health, as though the province had simply come down with a mild disappointment. Queen Alice let him finish. She had learned, over 20 years of ruling a people who had lost half a continent, that letting men finish was the cheapest form of mercy available to a monarch, and she liked to keep her budget in order. 940, she said, when the silence had gone on long enough to be uncomfortable for everyone but her. Say the number, Minister. It has the advantage of being short. He said the number. His voice cracked on it, which she counted as progress. She was, by the standards of her northern line, unremarkable to look at. Skin so pale it took the color of whatever light fell on it, and across her collarbones and the backs of her hands the fine silvered tracery her people called frost marks, like breath left on a cold window and never wiped away. Her ears swept back long and pointed past the line of her braid, which meant nothing at all except that she had been born on this world, and not another. 20 years ago, a human broadsheet had printed a drawing of an ashen face beside the word inhuman, and her brother Adrian had laughed at it over breakfast and said, "Well, they're not wrong. We aren't." 11 months later, she buried what the salvage crews had been able to recover of him, which fit in a box she could carry alone. She did not think about that in council. She thought about it later, at night, on schedule, the way one visits a grave. The call for healers had gone out 18 days ago, flung across 4 systems on every band the relay towers could scream on. The Ashen Reach did not ask outsiders for anything. Asking had cost her more than the fleet had. 19 physicians' guilds received it. 19 guilds found reasons. Quarantine protocol, travel restriction. A sudden and touching concern for their own borders. One answer came back. It came back within 9 hours, which meant whoever sent it had not consulted anybody, and it consisted of 4 words. On my way, Dylan. He's human, said Nora, blade captain of the hold, who had a talent for announcing catastrophes as though reading a lunch menu. I can read, said Alice. I know you can read, Majesty. I was hoping you'd read it wrong. The shuttle that set down on the West Terrace 3 days later was the kind of vessel that had been repaired more often than it had been flown, held together with mismatched hull plate and what Alice suspected was genuine structural optimism. The court assembled to meet it in full ceremonial cold. 40 nobles, 200 years of grudge, pressed and starched and standing in a line. The ramp came down. A man walked out carrying an instrument case in one hand and a coat he had clearly slept in over the other arm, and stopped, and looked at the assembled aristocracy of the Ashen Reach, the way a man looks at a wall he wasn't told about. "Oh," he said. "You all came out. That's lovely. That's very kind." He was somewhere in his 40th year, dark-haired, with the specific gray under the eyes that comes not from one bad night but from a long professional relationship with bad nights. He did not bow correctly. He bowed the way people bow when they have seen bowing described in a book. "Where are the children?" The chamberlain drew breath to begin the rite of presentation, which ran to 11 minutes and had been composed by someone paid by the line. "The fever wards," Dylan said, not unkindly, but not stopping either. "You wrote that it takes the young first. Where are they? I can do the ceremony afterward. I'll do 2 of them. I'll do it in a hat." Behind him, from the shuttle's hatch, a fist-sized ovoid drifted out on soft blue thrusters, spun once to survey the gathering, and announced in a bright and terrible voice, Atmospheric composition acceptable. Local hostility index elevated. Dylan, I count 9 visible weapons and a great deal of embroidery. Bell, I'm only saying they've committed to a theme. Alice heard distinctly the sound of 40 nobles deciding to be insulted, and underneath it, unwelcome as a stone in a shoe, the sound of her own throat producing something that had wanted very badly to be a laugh. She stepped forward before it could try again. You will be housed in the East Wing, she said. You will be watched at every hour by my blade captain, who does not like you. You will not go where she does not go. Is that acceptable, healer? He looked at her, properly, without flinching, the first person that week to do it, and she saw him take in the frost marks, the crown, the 20 years, and set all of it aside as information he did not currently need. Is she quick on stairs? He asked. I walk fast when I'm worried. I'm quick on stairs, said Nora coldly. Then it's acceptable. He shifted the case to his other hand. Take me down. The fever wards of Ashen Hold had been the winter granaries once, and nobody had quite finished pretending otherwise. There were still grain hooks in the ceiling. There were still faded stencils on the walls declaring the bushel price of the year 41 harvest, and beneath them now, 400 cots in rows, and the smell, that particular Swedish smell of too many people running too hot in one room, which Dylan noticed on the 3rd stair down and did not comment on, because commenting on it helped nobody, and he had a rule about that. Chief Physician Elena met him at the bottom with her arms folded and her ears flat back against her skull, which Nora later explained was the ashen equivalent of drawing a knife. I did not ask for you, Elena said. No, Dylan agreed, setting his case on a stool. The Queen did. I'd have come if the kitchen staff had asked. Where's your washing station? My what? He looked at her. Then he looked at the 400 cots and the orderlies moving between them, wiping their hands on their aprons, going from a dying child to a living one, and back with the same cloth, and something behind his face went very quiet and very cold, in a way that had nothing to do with anger, and everything to do with arithmetic. Right, he said. Bell, sing me the boiling water song. He means we're building a wash line, said the ovoid, drifting past Elena's shoulder at an insolent altitude. He calls it a song to make it sound less like 6 hours of unpaid labor. There is no song. He lies constantly about this. They argued for 11 days. That was the honest shape of it. Elena believed the sickness rose from the river silt, because it had come up the river, and Dylan told her that so had the boats, the mail, and the price of salt, and correlation was not a diagnosis. It was a rumor with a chart. She told him human medicine had once bled patients to balance their humors. He said yes, and that was why he'd rather be wrong loudly and early than politely and late. She threw a tray at his head on the 4th day. On the 7th, she brought him tea without saying anything, set it down hard enough to slosh, and left, which from Elena was practically a betrothal. The boy in the 9th row was called Owen. He was 6. He had a gap where 2 teeth had been, and he had opinions about everything: the soup, the ceiling hooks, the moral character of his sister. Dylan sat with him for 4 nights running, cooling him, arguing with him about whether a person could ride a river crane if the river crane consented, filtering his blood through a portable exchange unit that Bell described as held together by faith and one very good clamp. Owen died just before dawn on the 8th day, quietly, mid-sentence, the way children do when nobody has explained to them that it's supposed to be dramatic. Dylan stayed sitting for a while. Then he washed his hands and went to the next cot because the next cot was a girl named Mila who was 6 days behind Owen in the same race, and grief is a luxury item that the ward could not stock. Mila lived. That was the 11th day. She lived because Dylan had spent the previous 3 constructing an argument out of dialysis, cold saline, a rebuilt ashen plasma sieve, and roughly 900 terrible jokes, because the girl laughed when she should have been panicking, and a body that laughs breathes, and a body that breathes has options. He told her about a planet where the sea was carbonated. He told her Belle had once been a toaster with ambitions. Belle objected to this in the strongest terms available to a machine, and then repeated the toaster story, unprompted, to two other children in the row. The corridor outside filled up at night. That was the thing Nora found hardest to report to her queen with a straight face. By day, the Ashen who passed the human in the halls looked through him or spat neatly to one side, and by dark those same people came down the granary stairs with their children in their arms and their faces stripped of everything but asking, and he took every one of them. He never once said, "You spat at me this morning." He said, "How long has she been hot? Hold her head like this. Good, that's good. You did the right thing bringing her." Nora had been assigned to hate him. She had been given an entire brief on it. By the 9th day, she was running centrifuge samples up 2 flights because the orderlies were slower, and she had lost 4 separate bets to herself about it. And she reported all of this to Alice standing very straight, as though volume and posture could make it into something other than what it was. On the 11th evening, the Chamberlain came down with a lacquered chest and a speech. The chest held 800 weight in ashen silver, which was, Belle calculated helpfully and loudly, enough to buy a small moon or a medium-sized reputation. Dylan looked at it with the expression of a man handed a live fish at a funeral. "No, thank you. That's... no." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Sorry, I'm not... This isn't a noble refusal. I'm not doing a thing. I just genuinely don't want it, and I'd feel strange. And also I have nowhere to put it. Could you give it to the ward instead? They need a second sieve. And soap. God. So much soap." It was, Nora reported later, the worst refusal she had ever witnessed. There had been no dignity in it whatsoever. The court could have forgiven a proud man. They had no idea what to do with an embarrassed one. On the 12th night, Alice came down the granary stairs alone, unannounced, in a plain coat, having told herself 3 separate lies about why. She found him asleep in a chair at Mila's bedside, chin on his chest, one hand still resting on the girl's wrist, where he'd been counting her pulse. Alice stood there. The lamps hissed. Somewhere down the row, a child coughed and settled. She had come to observe a human, and she remained where she was for 11 minutes, and could not afterward account for a single one of them. Behind her, very softly, Belle said, "Majesty, might I show you something that is bothering me?" What Belle showed her was a map, and the trouble with the map was that it was beautiful. It hung in the air above the sample bench, a lattice of red points scattered across the river districts, and Alice's first thought, the thought of a woman who had grown up in a house with good tutors, was that it looked like a design. Plagues sprawl. Plagues go where the boats go, where the beggars sleep, where the wells are shallow. This one had edges. It ran 3 streets deep along the Kess embankment and stopped, cleanly, at a lane of tanners' houses where nobody had fallen ill at all, and picked up again 400 paces further on. "Poverty doesn't stop at a lane," said Belle. "Water doesn't stop at a lane. I have been staring at this for 6 days and being extremely annoying about it, and Dylan told me to stop, and then he looked at it for an hour and told me to make it bigger." Dylan was awake by then, in the wretched half-assembled way of a man who has been jolted out of a chair, hair on one side flattened into an architectural feature. He did not bow. He pointed at the tanner's lane. "Who lives there?" "Kesh blood," Alice said slowly. "Southern line. They came up from the Glass Coast after the war." "And here?" "The embankment. Northern. Old Reach families." "And this pocket, out past the mills where nobody's sick?" "Half-blood quarter, mostly. Mixed marriages. Kesh. Reach. Some Venick." She heard her own voice change while she was still speaking, the way one hears a floorboard go soft underfoot. "It is choosing." "It's reading," said Dylan. "That's worse. Belle, show her the coat protein." The thing that unfolded above the bench then was not a design metaphor. It was a design. a viral envelope, spiked and cornered, and threaded through it a sequence that Bell rendered in cheerful blue and which possessed the one quality no natural organism has ever managed in 4 billion years of trying. It was tidy. No junk, no redundancy. A gene lock, keyed to a marker, and the marker was a stretch of Ashen inheritance so old and so specific that Elena, arriving at a run, hair unbraided, having been fetched by an orderly with instructions to say, "Only come now," took one look and sat down on a stool without meaning to. "That is the Reach signature," she said. "That is what the genealogists use to fine people for lying about their grandmothers." "Then someone built a plague that checks papers," said Dylan. He said it into a room that had gone very quiet, and he said it without thinking, because he had been awake for most of 11 days, and the part of him that manages diplomacy had shut down around the 4th. And Alice watched the sentence land, and watched the 2 guards at the door hear it, and understood with perfect clarity that the next hour was going to be a machine she had built herself 20 years ago, and could not now stop. Engineered, the court would hear. Weapon, the court would hear. Human, the court would hear, because it was the only word any of them had ever needed. "Take him," she said. Nora's head came up. "Majesty, take him to the north cells. No irons, food, light, a bed." She did not look at him. That was the part she remembered afterward, the deliberate work of not looking. "Healer, understand me. If I leave you standing free in this room tonight, you will be dead by morning, and it will not be by my order. Go with her." Dylan looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his coat. "Feed Bell," he said. "He gets sulky." "I am Solar," said Bell. "He is being sentimental." Noted. The cell was clean and cold, and had a window with a view of the ash plain, which after 4 hours Dylan concluded was the true punishment. He was there for a day and a half. In that day and a half, 3 things happened that nobody had planned. The first was that Elena, who had thrown a tray at his head and who despised him with a thoroughness she considered a professional credential, went back to the bench and did the work properly, because she was too good a scientist to enjoy a conclusion she hadn't tested. The gene lock was human architecture. She could see the tool marks. The syntax was Concord style, blunt and modular, the way human labs had built things during the war. But the delivery, the shell, the timing, the way it slept in river silt for a season and woke on cold E, that was not human work at all. That was Ashen. "That was," she said, standing in Alice's private study with her hands shaking hard enough that she folded them, "our work. Someone with a Reach seal and a War Council clearance had helped build the thing that was eating Reach children." The second was that Nora broke 6 laws. She was very clear with herself about the number. She counted them on the walk down, the way other people count stairs, and she found she objected to precisely one of them and enjoyed the rest enormously. She unlocked the door, handed Dylan his case, and said, "If you make me regret this, I will drop you down a well." And he said, "That's fair. That seems fair." And they went up through the kitchens. The third was the archive. Because there was only one place in the Reach that held War Council seals from that decade, and Elena had already found the requisition, a shipment of sealed biological stock, routed south, signed off in a hand Alice had spent 20 years having carved onto monuments. Her brother's, Adrian's. The war archive was 6 levels under the hold, and it smelled of cold stone and the particular dust that settles on paper nobody wants to read. Alice went down at the 2nd hour of the morning with a lamp, Nora at her shoulder, Dylan 2 steps behind carrying a case he had not been given permission to carry, all 3 of them technically committing separate crimes and none of them discussing it. The requisition drawer took 4 minutes to open and 20 years to close. Adrian's hand was unmistakable, the long looping A, the way he crossed a numeral as if it had insulted him. The stock had gone south under war seal in the 43rd year to a facility that did not appear on any Reach registry, and the counter-signature at the bottom of the page was in Concord script, human, dated the same week. "The same week," Alice said. They signed the same week. There was no channel. There was no truce for 4 more years. Nora, There was no channel. There was one, said Dylan quietly. He had gone very still over a second folder. There's always one. Look at the manifest. 2 vaults. 2 keys. That's not a weapons program, that's a... He stopped and rubbed his eyes. That's a leash. They built each other a gun and then handed the triggers over. Mutual assurance. Ours points at you, yours points at us. Nobody moves. My brother, Alice said, was building a plague to kill Ashen. Your brother was building a plague to hold. So the humans would build theirs and both of them would sit in a hole in the ground forever being terrifying at each other. He looked up. It's the stupidest, most human thing I have ever read, and I'm including the part where we invented the salted pastry. It is not human, Alice said. It is half ours. That's the difficulty. Nora, who had been reading over their shoulders with the expression of someone attending her own funeral, said, Then somebody's cut the leash. Which was the shape of it. Somebody had gone into the southern vault under the glassed continent. The continent Alice had buried, the place her people did not name, and taken the master strain out of its sleep and put it in a river, and the only living Ashen with the clearance to do that was High Magistrate Hazel, who had sat at Alice's left hand for 11 years, and who had, 3 days ago, been the first voice in council to suggest that the human healer be executed as a precaution. The rest of it came out over the following week, in the flat, unglamorous way that treason usually does. A shipping ledger, a fuel discrepancy, and a discreet Concord broker named Axel whose accounts were so clean that Bell said they looked less like bookkeeping and more like a tribute act. Hazel wanted the war back, because a reach at war is a reach that obeys. Axel wanted what war costs and what it pays. Between them, they had worked out the oldest arithmetic there is, that the fastest way to unite a grieving people is to hand them a fresh corpse and point at somebody standing near it. The corpse was supposed to have been Dylan's. I'm flattered, he said when Alice told him. I've never been a casus belli before. My mother would be thrilled. She always said I'd end up in the papers. You are taking this poorly. I'm taking it musically, there's a difference. They talked in those days more than either of them intended. It kept happening at 3 in the morning in the sample room, which is the hour when nobody has the energy left to perform, and they were both spectacularly bad at the other kind of talking anyway. Alice could open a session of council with a sentence that made grown ministers reconsider their life choices, and could not, for the life of her, ask a man how he took his tea. Dylan could sit with a dying child for 9 hours, and went to pieces when someone thanked him. So they talked about other things. He told her about the carbonated sea, which turned out to be true. She told him about Adrian at 14, who had once tried to ride a river crane, and had the consent of neither the crane nor their mother. He asked once, carefully, whether she wanted him to stop mentioning her brother, and she said no, and discovered as she said it that it was true, and sat with that for a while. You know the worst part, she said. I built a reign on him. 20 years of they took him from us, and it turns out he was in a room somewhere shaking hands. The worst part, Dylan said, is that both things are true. They did take him. He also did that. People are extremely inconvenient that way. I've never once opened a chest cavity and found a simple person in there. That is a horrifying sentence. I've been up for a while. Elena brought the answer 8 days later, and it was not the answer anyone wanted. A cure was possible. She had the architecture, she had Dylan's sieve, she had 400 cots worth of miserable data. What she did not have, what nobody in the Reach had, was a viable master strain to build the antigen from. The river samples were degraded, generations of copying error deep, useless as a template. The original was still sleeping in the southern vault, under the glassed continent, under the ash of the place Alice did not name. Then we go, said Alice. Majesty, said Nora. The skiff is held together with optimism. Mine or yours? Chiefly mine, Majesty, and I'd like that on record. The glassed continent did not look like a graveyard from above. That was the obscenity of it. It looked like a lake, 3,000 miles of fused silica, smooth as poured milk, catching the low sun and throwing it back up at the skiff in long, slow sheets. And it was only when you dropped low enough to see the shapes under the glass, the street grids and the foundations. and the occasional pale suggestion of a bell tower, that your stomach understood what your eyes had been enjoying. Nobody talked for the first hour. Even Bell, who had opinions about everything, including the weather on planets it had never visited, restricted itself to navigational grumbling and one observation that the skiff's port thruster was expressing itself. "Meaning what?" said Nora. "Meaning it works, but with feeling." The vault entrance was a maintenance shaft under a collapsed relay station, and it took 40 minutes with a cutting torch and a great deal of swearing to get it open, most of the swearing Nora's, all of it inventive. Inside, the air was 50 years old and tasted like a coin. Dylan went down first because he had the sampling kit. Alice went second because she was not going to be third. Nora went last with her hand on her sidearm and a running commentary on the structural integrity of everything she touched. The vault itself was small. That was the thing that struck Alice hardest, that the apparatus of the end of two species had needed roughly the floor space of a decent kitchen. A cold rack, a power cell still ticking over on its final decade. 400 sealed ampules in neat rows, human labeled on one wall, Ashen labeled on the other, like a marriage where the couple keeps separate wardrobes. And a terminal, which woke when Dylan touched it, and played a recording that nobody had asked for. Adrian looked younger than the monuments made him. He looked tired and rather ordinary, and he spoke for 4 minutes, and the substance of it was this: that he had done it, that he had known exactly what it was, that he had believed a leash was better than a war, and that if anyone was hearing the recording, it meant somebody had gone into the vault for reasons other than checking the seals, and therefore he had been wrong about everything, and he was sorry. The recording ended. The power cell ticked. "Well," said Alice in a voice she barely recognized. "He always did have to have the last word. Majesty, take the sample, healer." Which was when Hazel came down the shaft with 11 of Axel's mercenaries and a speech. It was a good speech. That was the insult of it. Hazel had been 11 years at Alice's left hand and knew exactly which words the Reach responded to: purity, reckoning, the debt unpaid, and she delivered them standing in a room built to kill her own grandchildren, with the serene certainty of someone who has never once had to sit with the result of anything. "You were magnificent, Alice," she said. "For 20 years you were exactly what we needed. And then a human knelt beside a sick child and you forgot what you were for." "I did not forget," Alice said. "I was corrected. It is a different sensation. You would not know it." The firefight lasted 9 seconds and ruined everything. Nora took a round through the meat of her shoulder and put 4 mercenaries on the floor anyway, which she would describe afterward, at length, at every opportunity, for years. Bell, who was solar, unarmed, and morally opposed to violence in a way it mentioned constantly, flew directly into Hazel's face at 40 kilometers an hour, which it later insisted was a navigational error. And a stray shot went through the cold rack. The seal breached. The vault began, politely and immediately, to fill with 50-year-old aerosolized death. Dylan got the master ampule out of the rack with his bare hand because there was no time to do it any other way, and shoved it into the case and shoved the case at Alice and shouted something that was mostly a verb. She had a rifle in one hand and a plague in the other, and a human between her and the door, and she understood in that moment, with the total clarity of a woman who has just done the arithmetic and hated the result, that she was not going to leave without him. They got out. Hazel got out too. Axel's people did not, and there would be time for that later, in a courtroom with the doors open. The flight home was 6 hours long, and it was a race, and everybody on board knew what it was a race against by the second hour, when Dylan started sweating and stopped joking, which was more alarming than the sweating. He was sick into a bucket in the cargo hold, twice, with enormous embarrassment. "Don't watch," he said. "It's undignified. You knelt in filth for 11 days for my people." "Yes, but I chose that. This is just Dylan." She had never used it before. He looked up. "I have hated your species since I was 23 years old. I have built a throne on it. I have had it carved into stone." She wiped his mouth with the edge of her own sleeve, which is a thing queens do not do. "You have made an idiot of me, and I find that I do not want you to die, and I am telling you now because I have observed that people wait too long." He blinked at her, gray-faced, over a bucket. That's the worst-timed romantic declaration in recorded history. I have no practice. It shows. It's great. Say it again when I'm not. He stopped, swallowed. Say it again later. Elena met the skiff at the terrace with the cure half built and one missing piece, and when she found it, 4 hours later, she came into the room white to the lips. The resistance factor is real, she said. It's inherited. It sleeps in the old northern line. She could not make herself look at the Queen's hands. It's in the frost marks, Majesty. It's in you. And to seed enough for a world, we would have to take so much that it will burn them out of your skin. Permanently. Alice's answer took 11 seconds, and 8 of those were spent removing her coat. Majesty, said Elena, I need you to understand what I am telling you. The marks are not decoration. The genealogists read them. The southern houses count them. Every portrait in the long gallery. I know what they are. They are the emblem of the northern line. They are the reason half the Reach kneels when you enter a room. Then the half that kneels for my skin can stand up, said Alice, and find something better to kneel for. Sit me down and take it. It took 9 days, and it was tedious rather than dramatic, which she thought afterward was the truest thing about it. The great sacrifice of her reign consisted of lying on a couch, being repeatedly stuck with needles, while a machine hummed, and Dylan, still yellow around the edges, still not permitted to stand up for long, read aloud to her from a Concord medical journal in the voice of a man performing a hostage video. Chapter 4. The Lymphatic System. Stop. You said you wanted distraction. I want entertainment. There is a difference, and you are on the wrong side of it. The marks went slowly. By the 4th day, the tracery across her collarbones had faded to a suggestion. By the 7th, her hands were plain as a farmhand's. By the 9th, there was nothing left at all but skin. And she looked at herself in the glass for a long moment and discovered that she felt precisely nothing about it, which was itself an event worth recording. The cure went north on riverboats and south on the mail relays and out to the mill quarters in the arms of orderlies who had not slept. It broke the plague in 19 days. 12,000 had died, and Alice made herself learn that number rather than the polite version of it, and had it read aloud in council once a year for the rest of her reign, a tradition her ministers loathed and never dared cancel. Mila lived. Mila, in fact, thrived, and grew up insufferable about having been personally acquainted with 3 separate historical figures, and would in time become a physician herself, largely so she could tell people about it professionally. Hazel was tried in the open court with the doors unbarred and the recordings played in full. Adrian's confession first, because Alice would not permit a trial built on a secret. It cost her. The southern houses shouted for a week. A monument came down in the river district and was not replaced, and the plinth stood empty for 2 years until somebody put a bench on it, which Alice privately considered an improvement on the original. She stood before her people with her plain, unmarked hands held where everyone could see them, and told them the whole of it, that her brother had helped build the thing that killed their children, that she had spent 20 years teaching them a grief that was 3/4 true and 1/4 convenient, and that a reign built on a comfortable lie was not worth the stone it was carved into. You may hate me for it, she said. I have some experience of hating for 20 years. I do not recommend it. It is a great deal of work, and it makes you poor company. Axel was extradited. That was the small door that turned out to be the large one. To hand a human criminal to human courts, the Reach required a channel, and a channel required an agreement, and an agreement required 2 delegations sitting in a room being awkward at each other over bad tea. The Cass Accord ran to 9 pages, most of them about shipping tariffs. Historians would later call it the beginning of the peace. Everyone actually present remembered it chiefly as the week the translator kept rendering mutual obligation as shared indigestion, which turned out to be diplomatically useful. Nora was made Lord Marshal of the Hold and abused the office within 4 hours by requisitioning a river crane for security assessment, and wrote it badly in front of 11 witnesses. She kept the shoulder scar and the story and improved the story annually. She and Elena, who had spent the crisis in a state of mutual professional contempt, discovered over the following year that this had been a misunderstanding of an entirely different feeling, and were married in the spring and argued happily for 40 years about whose fault it had been. Belle received a firmware update to which it did not consent, was designated sole property of the Crown, and objected so continuously and at such length that Alice eventually had a plaque made reading "Property of Nobody," which he insisted upon, and bolted it to the ovoid's charging cradle, where it remained for the rest of a very long career of unsolicited commentary. The Chamberlain, who had never recovered from the ruined rite of presentation, brought the lacquered chest out a second time on the last day of the summit, on the grounds that the healer had now saved the entire species and something really must be done. "No," said Dillon. "Thank you. Same as before. Give it to the ward. They still need soap. It's astonishing. I don't know what they do with it." "You are the worst compensated man in 4 systems," said Alice, later, on the west balcony, where the ash haze had thinned enough that you could make out the second moon for the first time in a decade. "I've been thinking about that." He turned around, leaned back against the rail, and looked at her, at the plain hands, the plain collarbones, the long swept-back ears, the whole unremarkable, astonishing arrangement of her. "I might accept something after all, if it's still on offer. You said it in a cargo hold over a bucket, which I've decided not to hold against you because you did warn me you had no practice." Alice, Queen of the Ashen Reach, who had buried a brother and a fleet and half a continent, and who had closed her throne room to an entire species for 20 years, found that her mouth had gone dry. "It is still on offer," she said. "Say something witty. I have no idea what to do with my hands." "Neither do I," said Dillon. "That's rather the point of the exercise." So they worked it out, as the haze cleared, badly and slowly, and with no dignity whatsoever, which both of them would have told you afterward is the only honest way anybody has ever done it. 20 years is a long time to be certain about something. It is long enough to build a throne on it, and a foreign policy, and a way of holding your face when a certain word is spoken. Long enough that the certainty stops feeling like an opinion you once formed and starts feeling like a bone you were born with. Alice did not hate humans the way a person holds a grudge. She hated them the way a house holds a load-bearing wall. Take it out, and what exactly is left standing? And then a tired man came down a granary staircase and asked where the children were. That is all it took, not an argument, not evidence. Nobody out-reasoned her, because nobody has ever been reasoned out of a wall. What undid 20 years was watching one person kneel in the dark beside a dying child who was not his, in a country that was not his, for a people who spat at him in the street, and then refused the money afterward, badly, awkwardly, with no nobility she could have defended herself against. She could have looked away. That is the part worth sitting with. She could have called it the exception, the one decent human, the trick, the tactic. The mind has 100 small doors for letting a person escape being changed, and every one of them stays open. She chose not to use them. That was the whole of her courage. Not the vault, not the firefight, not even the needles and the 9 days that took the frost marks off her skin forever. Just standing in a doorway at midnight and refusing to explain a man away. Because here is the quiet cruelty of the thing. Her grief was real. Her brother was really dead. The fleet was really lost. The continent really glassed. She was not wrong about what had been taken from her. She was only wrong about what she was owed for it. And that is a far harder error to find, because it hides behind something true. So the questions the story leaves you with are not about aliens. Who is the person you have already decided about, and when did you last check the ruling? What have you built on a grief that was mostly true? And would you still want the building if you learned about the quarter that wasn't? Is there someone you have been careful never to see up close because up close is where certainty goes to die? And if a stranger walked in tomorrow and quietly proved you wrong about something you have organized your whole life around, would you thank them? Or would you simply put them in a cell and go on being right, and never once wonder what the cell was really for? The end. We've reached the end of another chapter, friends. Before we go, don't forget to hit the like button below and leave your thoughts on the story in the comments. Subscribe to Sci-Fi Traveler so you don't miss the next story. The next chapter will be released very soon. Until then, Take care, friends.